The first time I heard Denise Holloway beg, I almost didn't recognize her voice. 5 days earlier, she'd stood in my driveway, wearing a perfectly pressed navy blazer, sunglasses balanced on top of her blonde hair, telling me with complete confidence that my workshop no longer belonged to me. Now she was standing outside the locked steel gate to my property, mascara streaking down her face, pounding both fists against the chain-link fence. "Ethan!" she screamed. "Please, you have to open the gate. My SUV is in there." The entire street had gathered. Neighbors lined both sidewalks, whispering into one another's ears while holding coffee cups they had long since forgotten to drink. Phones were pointed in our direction. Someone across the street was already live streaming. Denise didn't seem to notice. She looked nothing like the woman who had laughed when she handed me an HOA violation notice. Her expensive heels were coated in mud. Her breathing came in frantic bursts. She grabbed the fence so hard her wedding ring scraped against the metal. "My medication is inside the vehicle," she shouted. "Please, Ethan, this isn't funny anymore." I stood 20 feet away beside my workshop, arms folded, saying nothing. The sheriff's deputy beside me looked toward Denise, then back at me. "Mr. Carter," he asked quietly, "are you certain you don't want to let her retrieve it?" I reached into my pocket and unfolded a stack of county documents that had already become the most valuable papers I'd ever owned. "I'm certain," I replied. The deputy nodded once. He had read every page. He understood exactly why that luxury SUV wasn't leaving my property. Denise certainly did. She took one shaky step backward before pointing directly at me. "You planned this?" "No," I answered calmly. "You did. I warned you. You trapped me." I couldn't help shaking my head. "No, Denise, you trespassed." The crowd fell completely silent. Even the birds seemed to stop making noise. Denise slowly turned toward the sheriff. "There has to be something you can do," she pleaded. The deputy adjusted his duty belt before speaking in the calm voice of someone who had already delivered bad news too many times. "Ma'am, based on the documents we've verified with the county this morning, Mr. Carter is acting entirely within his legal rights." Her face drained of color. "But," she whispered. The deputy continued, "And there's something else you should know." Denise stared at him. "So should everyone else." The deputy pulled a folded survey map from his folder, opened it across the hood of his patrol SUV, and pointed to one bold red line. The moment Denise saw what that line actually meant, she staggered backward as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "The truth is, none of this started with an SUV. It started with a workshop my father built 31 years earlier, one cedar beam at a time. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 42 years old, and I make custom furniture for a living. I don't have a showroom in some trendy part of town. My clients come to me because every table, cabinet, and rocking chair that leaves my shop is built by hand. No assembly lines, no shortcuts, just wood, patience, and thousands of hours learning a craft that my father believed was worth protecting. When he passed away, he didn't leave me millions of dollars. He left me something far more personal. 5 acres just outside Franklin, Tennessee. The white farmhouse where I learned to ride a bike. The old oak tree where my mother hung a tire swing. And the workshop where my father taught me that every measurement mattered because mistakes hidden beneath fresh paint always found a way to reveal themselves. That lesson would end up meaning far more than either of us could have imagined. My property sat beside an upscale neighborhood called Willow Creek Estates. Years before, it had been open farmland, but developers bought everything around us. They built large brick homes, landscaped entrances, decorative ponds, and eventually formed an HOA. Our land was never part of it. The county records proved that. The developer knew that. Even the original HOA documents excluded my property. I paid county taxes. They paid HOA dues. Our worlds existed side by side without ever crossing. At least, that's how it had always been. Most of my neighbors were decent people. Mike Dawson, who lived across the fence in Willow Creek, often wandered over on Saturday mornings carrying coffee. "You've got sawdust in your beard again," he'd joke. "It keeps mosquitoes away." "No, it doesn't." "Then it impresses customers," he'd laugh, leaning against the workshop door while I sanded walnut or maple. "You ever think about selling this place?" "Not once." I wouldn't either. He understood what the land meant to me. So did everyone else, or so I believed. The first strange sign appeared on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I stepped outside with my coffee and found a bright orange survey flag planted beside my gravel driveway. At first I assumed the county had marked underground utilities. By lunchtime there were 6 more. Each one crept farther onto my property. I pulled one from the ground and noticed fresh tire tracks crossing the grass toward my workshop. Heavy truck tires. Someone had been on my land before sunrise. That evening I called the county planning office. The woman who answered sounded confused. "Mr. Carter, we haven't scheduled any survey work at your address." "You're sure?" "I'm looking at the system now. Nothing has been requested." I glanced back toward the orange flags fluttering in the evening breeze. "If it wasn't the county," I asked slowly, "who put them there?" She paused. "I'm afraid I can't answer that." The next morning I got my answer. A white pickup rolled onto my driveway without slowing down, followed by a black luxury SUV with a small blue decal on the windshield. The letters were impossible to miss. Willow Creek HOA. The SUV stopped directly in front of my workshop. The driver's door opened. A sharply dressed woman stepped out, carrying a leather folder, as if she had already decided how this conversation was going to end. The confidence in her stride made one thing painfully clear. She wasn't here to ask permission. I set my coffee on the workbench just inside the shop and walked back outside, wiping the sawdust from my hands onto an old rag. The woman waited until I was only a few feet away before extending a hand that never quite reached me. "I'm Denise Holloway," she said, "president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." Her tone wasn't friendly. It was rehearsed, the kind people use when they expect immediate compliance. "I'm Ethan Carter. I know who you are." Something about the way she smiled made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Behind her, 2 men in reflective safety vests had already climbed out of the pickup. One carried a measuring wheel. The other was unloading wooden stakes. I looked past Denise. "Can I help you with something?" "Actually," she replied, opening her leather folder, "we're here to help you." I raised an eyebrow. "Help me?" She pulled out a laminated site plan and spread it across the hood of her SUV. The HOA board recently approved an improvement project along the eastern boundary of Willow Creek Estates. I studied the map. A landscaped walking trail, decorative fencing, a small picnic area, and right in the middle of it, my workshop. I laughed once, convinced I had misunderstood. "I think you've got the wrong property." "No," she said calmly. "We've confirmed the boundary." She tapped the paper with a polished fingernail. "This workshop is located on HOA common property." I stared at her. "What?" "As of today, you'll need to remove any personal belongings from the structure while we prepare the site." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Denise, this workshop has been here longer than your subdivision. Our records indicate otherwise. My father built it. Our records disagree." I folded my arms. "Then your records are wrong." Her smile disappeared. "Mr. Carter, arguing won't change legal boundaries." I looked toward the 2 workers who had already begun walking toward my building with measuring equipment. "Hold it!" They stopped. Denise didn't even turn around. "You can continue," she told them. "No," I said sharply. "You can leave." One of the workers hesitated. "Ma'am," Denise's voice hardened, "the board has authorized today's inspection." I stepped directly into their path. "You're standing on private property." For the first time, the workers looked uncomfortable. One quietly lowered his measuring wheel. "I don't think we should." Denise spun toward them. "If either of you refuse to complete contracted work, I'll notify your supervisor." The older worker sighed. "With respect, we'd rather see proof before measuring someone's land." She shot him a glare that could have cracked glass. "I am the proof." I couldn't help it. I laughed. That only made her angrier. "You think this is amusing? I think you're making a mistake you'll regret." Her face tightened. "I've dealt with stubborn property owners before. I'm not a property owner inside your HOA. We'll let the attorneys decide that." Before I could answer, she reached into her folder and handed me an envelope. Across the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Notice of HOA violation." I looked at her. "You can't fine someone who's not a member. You'll owe $500 immediately." I almost smiled. "I'm not paying you a penny." Her voice dropped into something colder. "Then the fines will increase daily." Mike Dawson appeared at the fence separating our properties. "Denise," he called, "what are you doing?" "This is HOA business." "No," Mike replied. "That's Ethan's land." She didn't even look at him. "Please return to your property." Mike shook his head. "You're crossing a line." She finally turned. The only line that matters is the property line. I answered before Mike could. Exactly. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I'm calling the sheriff. Her expression didn't change. Go ahead. I already have. The deputy arrived 15 minutes later. After listening to both sides, he asked a simple question. Does anyone have documentation proving ownership? I disappeared into the farmhouse and returned carrying my deed, tax records, and a certified survey my father had commissioned years earlier. Denise calmly handed over a single photocopied subdivision map. The deputy compared them silently, his brow furrowed. This doesn't add up. Denise folded her arms. Our legal department will clarify everything. The deputy handed my documents back. For today, nobody's entering that workshop. It should have ended there. Instead, Denise climbed into her SUV, lowered the window, and looked directly at me. This isn't over, Mr. Carter. I watched her drive away, convinced she'd simply embarrassed herself. I was wrong. By the following morning, my mailbox contained 3 more violation notices, and someone had quietly placed heavy concrete barriers across the only gravel road leading to my workshop. That's when I realized this wasn't just an argument over a property line. Someone was trying to force me off my own land. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those concrete barriers blocking the only road to my workshop. They weren't just an inconvenience. My clients couldn't reach me. A delivery of black walnut lumber had already been postponed because the truck driver refused to risk squeezing past the barriers. Every cancelled order meant lost income, and whoever had placed them there knew exactly what they were doing. At sunrise, I grabbed my camera and photographed everything from every angle. Tire tracks, the barriers, the fresh scrape marks on the gravel where heavy equipment had been unloaded. I wanted a record of every detail before anything mysteriously disappeared. Mike walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. I figured you were already up, he said, handing me one. You know me too well. He stared at the barriers for a long moment. I asked around last night, and nobody on the HOA board voted for this. That caught my attention. What do you mean? I talked to one of the board members at the grocery store. He said Denise emailed everyone claiming there was an emergency property dispute and that she had authority to protect HOA assets until the lawyers sorted it out. I frowned. So they never actually approved blocking my driveway? Mike shook his head. He looked pretty surprised when I told him what she'd done. That was the first crack in Denise's story. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting across from Rachel Morgan, a real estate attorney whose office walls were lined with framed aerial maps and county plats instead of fancy artwork. She listened without interrupting while I laid the deed, survey, tax records and violation notices across her conference table. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Mr. Carter, Ethan. She nodded. Ethan, I've handled boundary disputes for nearly 20 years, and I've never seen an HOA try to claim property that wasn't included in its original declaration. So they're bluffing. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up Denise's subdivision map. Where did she get this? She handed it to the deputy. Rachel narrowed her eyes. Something's missing. She pulled my certified survey closer and laid it beside the HOA map. For nearly 5 minutes, she compared measurements, lot numbers, and legal descriptions without saying a word. Then she reached for a yellow marker. Look here. She circled a narrow strip of land running along my eastern fence. See this? It looks like a utility easement. Exactly. She tapped the HOA map. But on Denise's copy, I leaned forward. The easement wasn't there. Neither was the notation identifying my 5-acre parcel as an independent tract recorded decades before Willow Creek Estates even existed. Rachel looked up. This isn't just outdated. What is it? It's been altered. A chill ran through me. You mean someone changed it? Either that. She slid both maps toward me. Or someone intentionally provided an incomplete version to make your workshop appear inside the HOA. For the first time, this felt like more than arrogance. It felt planned. Rachel immediately called Harold Benson, a licensed surveyor she'd trusted for years. By late afternoon, Harold met us at my property carrying a GPS survey unit worth more than my pickup truck. He spent nearly 3 hours walking every corner of the land, placing temporary markers and checking coordinates against county records. As the sun dipped lower, he removed his hat and let out a slow whistle. I've got good news, he said. I managed a tired smile. I could use some. He pointed toward my workshop. You're not 6 inches inside the HOA, I exhaled. You're not 1 foot inside it. He paused. You're almost 47 feet outside of it. Rachel smiled for the first time all day. Denise hadn't just been wrong, she'd been spectacularly wrong. But Harold wasn't finished. He reached into his truck, pulled out an old rolled survey map dated nearly 30 years earlier, and spread it across the hood. This, he said quietly, is what really worries me. I looked down. Across the bottom of the survey was a handwritten county notation that had never appeared on any document I'd seen before. Next to it was a signature, not my father's, not the developer's, but Denise Holloway's late father, the very man who had originally developed Willow Creek Estates. For several seconds, none of us spoke. I stared at the faded signature, as if it might change if I looked long enough. You're sure that's him? I asked. Harold adjusted his glasses and nodded. Thomas Holloway. He signed dozens of subdivision documents back in the 90s. I've seen his signature more times than I can count. Rachel leaned closer to the survey. And this notation, Harold traced the handwritten sentence with his finger. 5-acre Carter parcel expressly excluded from future HOA jurisdiction. Permanent access easement to remain unobstructed. I felt my stomach tighten. So Denise's father acknowledged my property wasn't part of the HOA. Not only acknowledged it, Harold replied, he agreed to it. Rachel immediately reached for her phone. We need certified copies from the county archives. If this original matches the recorded version, Denise's entire claim falls apart. By noon the next day, Olivia Grant, the county records clerk, called Rachel personally. I found the originals, Olivia said over speakerphone. Every page is intact. Rachel looked at me. Any changes? Olivia didn't hesitate. Yes. The room went silent. The subdivision map currently being circulated by Willow Creek isn't the one filed with the county. My pulse quickened. What do you mean? The recorded plat contains 2 pages that are missing from the HOA's version. Rachel exchanged a glance with me. What do those pages show? Olivia answered carefully. They identify your parcel by legal description, confirm the permanent exclusion from the HOA, and include the signed access easement. Rachel thanked her and ended the call. There it is, she said quietly. That's fraud. Before I could process what she'd said, my phone buzzed. It was Mike. Ethan, get home, right now. His voice was strained. I was already grabbing my truck keys. When I pulled into my driveway 20 minutes later, my heart dropped. 3 tow trucks, 2 landscaping trailers, half a dozen contractors, and Denise Holloway, standing in the middle of my gravel road with a clipboard. The concrete barriers were gone. Instead, orange construction fencing surrounded the front of my workshop. What are you doing? I shouted as I jumped out of the truck. Denise didn't even flinch. Beginning improvements. You've lost your mind. She smiled thinly. No, Mr. Carter. I'm enforcing HOA authority. Rachel stepped out of her car behind me, briefcase in hand. You've been formally notified that this property isn't part of your association. Denise glanced at Rachel. And you are? Rachel Morgan, counsel for Mr. Carter. Denise laughed. Then you already know you'll lose. Rachel calmly held up the certified county records we'd picked up an hour earlier. I don't think so. For the first time, Denise's confidence flickered, only for a second. Then she recovered. I've instructed the contractors to continue. One of the foremen walked over. Ma'am, we're hearing there's a legal dispute. There isn't. Rachel spoke before Denise could continue. There absolutely is. She handed the foreman a copy of the certified survey. If you touch that workshop after receiving notice, every contractor here could be named in a civil lawsuit. The foreman read only the first page before lowering it. He turned toward his crew. Pack it up. Denise's face turned bright red. You work for the HOA? No, the foreman replied evenly. I work for my family. I'm not risking my license. Within minutes, every contractor climbed back into their vehicles and drove away. Denise stood alone in the middle of my driveway, trembling with anger. You'll regret humiliating me, Rachel answered before I could. No, Denise. She handed over a thick envelope. You've just been served. Denise ripped it open. Inside was a lawsuit seeking damages for trespass, business interference, fraudulent misrepresentation, and an emergency injunction preventing the HOA from entering my property again. As she read each page, the color drained from her face. Then she looked up with pure hatred. This isn't over. Rachel didn't blink. No. She closed her briefcase with a quiet click. It begins in court Monday morning. By Monday morning, the courthouse in Franklin was more crowded than I had ever seen it. Word had spread far beyond Willow Creek Estates. Neighbors filled the gallery. Local reporters sat along the back wall with notepads open. Even a few contractors who had walked off Denise's project showed up, quietly taking seats near the entrance. Rachel glanced at me before we entered the courtroom. Nervous, I let out a slow breath. I've built furniture worth $50,000 without shaking. And today, my hands won't stop. She smiled. That's normal. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. All rise. Judge Rebecca Collins entered, her expression calm but unreadable. Once everyone was seated, she looked over the case file. This matter concerns a property ownership dispute, alleged trespass, fraudulent documentation, and interference with a lawful business. She looked first at Rachel. Counsel, you may proceed. Rachel stood. Your Honor, this case is not a boundary dispute. She paused. It is a case of an HOA attempting to seize property it has never owned. She walked to the evidence table. We will prove 3 things. She raised one finger. First, Mr. Carter's property has always existed as an independent parcel. A second finger. Second, Willow Creek HOA possesses no legal authority over that parcel. A third. And finally, the defendant knowingly relied on altered documents after receiving notice that those documents were false. The courtroom became very quiet. Denise's attorney, Mark Ellis, rose immediately. Objection to counsel's characterization. Judge Collins looked at him. You'll have an opportunity to respond. Rachel called Harold Benson first. Harold explained, step by step, how he had verified the property lines using modern GPS equipment and compared them with the original county surveys. Rachel displayed a large aerial map on a screen. Mr. Benson, where is Mr. Carter's workshop? Harold pointed with a laser pointer. Here. And where does the HOA boundary begin? He moved the laser nearly 50 feet away. Right here. So the workshop is 46.8 feet outside HOA property. Rachel nodded. No further questions. Mark Ellis approached confidently. Mr. Benson, isn't it possible older surveys contained measurement errors? Harold smiled politely. If they had, the county monument markers would disagree. And do they? No. So you're certain? I'm professionally licensed to be certain. A few people in the gallery chuckled before Judge Collins restored order. Rachel's next witness was Olivia Grant, from the county records office. She carried a sealed archive box. Rachel asked one simple question. Ms. Grant, did you compare the official county plat with the version circulated by Willow Creek HOA? I did. Were they identical? No. She carefully removed 2 large documents from protective sleeves. The official plat contains 2 additional recorded pages. Rachel held them up for the judge. What do those pages establish? That the Carter parcel is permanently excluded from HOA jurisdiction and has a recorded access easement. Mark Ellis stood. Could those pages have been accidentally omitted? Of looked directly at him. They are numbered sequentially. She held up the originals. Someone would have had to remove both pages intentionally. A murmur swept through the courtroom. For the first time all morning, Denise stopped making eye contact with anyone. Rachel wasn't finished. She approached the evidence table once more. Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit 14. The courtroom screen lit up. It wasn't another map. It was an email. Rachel looked toward Denise. This email was obtained during discovery from the HOA's own server. Denise's attorney's face immediately changed. He clearly hadn't expected this. Judge Collins adjusted her glasses. Counsel. Rachel nodded. The metadata has already been authenticated. The judge looked at the screen. So the jury, or rather the court, understands. Rachel took a breath. This email was sent by Denise Holloway 3 days before the first violation notice. The courtroom fell completely silent as Rachel began reading the opening lines aloud. And halfway through the message, Denise suddenly whispered 2 words that everyone in the room could hear. Oh. No. The silence after Rachel finished reading the email felt heavier than anything I had experienced in my life. No one shifted in their seat. No one whispered. Even the reporters had stopped writing. Rachel lowered the printed copy and looked toward the bench. Your Honor, the remainder of this email states, and I quote, if we keep referring to the workshop as HOA property, he'll eventually give up or settle. Once we connect the trail through that parcel, the homes on the east side will increase in value. She paused before adding one final sentence. It was signed, Denise. Judge Collins looked over her glasses at Denise. Mrs. Holloway, is this your email? Denise's attorney slowly stood. Your Honor, the judge raised a hand. I asked your client a direct question. Denise swallowed hard. Her confident posture from a week earlier had completely disappeared. She looked at the screen, then at her attorney, before quietly answering,
"Yes." A collective gasp spread through the courtroom. Judge Collins leaned back in her chair.
"So despite possessing records showing Mr. Carter's property was excluded from HOA jurisdiction, you continued issuing violations, authorized construction activity, blocked his access road, and represented to contractors and law enforcement that the property belonged to the association."
Denise said nothing. The judge waited.
Finally, Denise whispered, "Yes, Your Honor."
The courtroom remained silent as Judge Collins reviewed her notes. When she looked up again, her voice was firm. "The court finds that Mr. Carter is the sole lawful owner of the disputed property. The evidence overwhelmingly establishes that his parcel has never been part of Willow Creek Homeowners Association." I felt Rachel lightly squeeze my arm. Judge Collins continued. "The court further finds that the defendants intentionally interfered with Mr. Carter's business operations, trespassed upon his land, and relied upon altered and incomplete property documents after being placed on notice of their inaccuracy." Denise closed her eyes. "The court therefore enters judgment in favor of Mr. Carter." For the first time in days, I could breathe normally. But the judge wasn't finished. Willow Creek HOA is permanently enjoined from entering Mr. Carter's property, issuing further violations, or representing in any form that his land falls within its jurisdiction. She turned another page. "Mr. Carter is awarded compensatory damages for lost business income, legal expenses, and property interference." Then came the sentence that changed everything. "Based upon the evidence presented regarding altered documents and intentional misrepresentation, this matter is hereby referred to the district attorney for review of potential civil and criminal violations." Denise's attorney slowly lowered his head. The hearing was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded the courthouse steps. One microphone was held toward me. "Mr. Carter, what does this victory mean to you?" I looked back at the courthouse before answering. "It means the truth still matters." A few days later, the Willow Creek HOA held an emergency meeting. Several board members publicly admitted they had never authorized Denise's actions and had relied on the information she provided. Within hours, she resigned as HOA president. A month later, homeowners voted in an entirely new board, adopted stricter transparency rules, and required independent legal review before any future property enforcement actions. As for Denise, I heard she quietly put her house on the market before the end of summer. Neighbors who had barely waved to me before now stopped by just to apologize or introduce themselves. Mike laughed one afternoon as we stood outside my workshop. "You know," he said, looking around, "this place has become the most famous 5 acres in Franklin." I smiled. "I'd rather it just go back to being my workshop," he grinned. "I think it finally will." The greatest satisfaction wasn't the judgment or the headlines. It was unlocking my workshop the next morning, hearing the familiar creak of the old wooden door, and knowing that no one would ever again make me question whether I belonged on the land my father had entrusted to me. A year has passed since the judge settled the dispute, and life has finally found its way back to normal. Most mornings begin the same way they always did. I unlock the workshop just after sunrise, breathe in the familiar scent of fresh-cut oak and walnut, switch on the old radio my father used to listen to, and get back to building furniture. The tire tracks are gone. The construction fencing is long gone. Even the gravel road has been repaired, looking better than it did before everything happened. Every now and then, someone drives by just to see the workshop that beat the HOA. I usually smile, wave, and go back to work. That's all I've ever wanted, to be left alone to enjoy the property my family worked so hard to keep. Looking back, I realized this fight was never really about a building. It was about standing up for the truth when someone with authority expected me to surrender simply because they sounded confident. I learned that official titles don't replace legal documents, and loud voices don't erase facts. Most importantly, I learned that protecting what's yours sometimes requires patience, courage, and the willingness to keep fighting, even when the odds seem stacked against you. If you're dealing with an HOA, a property dispute, or any situation where you feel powerless, don't assume the other side is automatically right. Ask questions, keep records, learn your rights, and never be afraid to seek good legal advice before giving up something that belongs to you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me and following this journey from beginning to end. If you've ever had an HOA, neighbor, or property dispute, I'd genuinely love to hear about it. What would you have done if someone tried to claim your property with paperwork they knew was false?
Share your experience in the comments. I read as many as I can.
If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe for more gripping HOA and legal justice stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Until next time, remember, the strongest foundation isn't made of concrete or wood. It's built on truth, and the truth has a way of standing firm when everything else falls apart.